A Russian fighter jet flies dangerously close over the Baltic Sea, sparking outrage from Berlin, as Kazakhstan rejects mediation between Moscow and Kyiv, and Zelensky responds to Western pressure. The Kremlin announces plans for victory amid an intense phase of the conflict, while a bold statement in St. Petersburg targets Trump. Western media discuss a sharp White House pivot, and speculation mounts about possible capitulation talks. Russian oil ports are paralyzed after a sea strike. New details emerge on a ballistic attack in the south, and a man is jailed for a social media like as global tensions rise. If you have thoughts to share, join the conversation below and respond to my questions in the comments. Your likes and subscriptions are greatly appreciated. Now let us begin. Nearly 42% of Poles believe that Ukraine ought to make territorial concessions and relinquish some of its land. Of this group, 17.2% responded with a definitive yes. These figures come from a United Service survey conducted for Virtual Poland, as reported by Polish media. At the same time, close to 48% of participants, essentially half, are convinced that Russia should not be rewarded with Ukrainian land in exchange for security assurances, weapons, or an end to the conflict. Around 1 in 10 respondents found it difficult to answer. Among supporters of the ruling coalition, a majority, 59%, oppose ceding territory to Russia, while backers of opposition parties such as Law and Justice and Confederation are evenly split, with half supporting concessions and half opposing them. Moving on to a tense incident. Berlin reported that a Russian aircraft flew over a German frigate in the Baltic Sea. This bold claim was made by Germany's Minister of Defense. When exactly this occurred was not specified by Pistorius, but German press sources indicate it happened several days ago. The Russian plane passed over the Hamburg frigate, which is currently participating in the NATO Neptune strike exercises. Pistorius stated that Russia is increasingly testing NATO's resilience. He described the event as a provocation aimed at uncovering vulnerabilities in Europe's defenses. Incidents such as Russian drones and fighters violating Polish and Estonian airspace, together with the recent flyover of the German frigate, illustrate Russia's growing frequency and intensity in probing borders, including those of NATO members. Putin, he says, wants to provoke us, to challenge the NATO alliance, to identify and exploit any perceived weaknesses. Of note, at the time of this broadcast, Russian authorities had not yet commented on Pistorius' statements regarding the overflight. Meanwhile, Pistorius declared that Germany plans a significant strengthening of its armed forces. The plan calls for increasing Bundeswehr personnel to 460,000 soldiers, comprising 260,000 active servicemen and 200,000 reservists. The government intends to reach these targets within 8 to 10 years. Turning to Kazakhstan, President Tokayev responded to Zelensky's suggestion that a meeting with Putin could take place in Kazakhstan. According to Tengri News KZ, Tokayev described the situation in Ukraine as both a military conflict and a Ukrainian crisis, terms frequently used in official Chinese statements. Astana clarified that Kazakhstan does not serve as a mediator between Kyiv and Moscow, and does not see itself in that role. Furthermore, Tokayev remarked that this crisis is, in his words, extremely complex and should not be oversimplified. He added that both Russia and Ukraine are capable of holding bilateral discussions at various levels on all contentious issues. Tokayev emphasized that numerous problems, ranging from territorial to historical and linguistic, are intertwined with the conflict, making it naive to expect a swift resolution without a ceasefire and substantial groundwork. Nevertheless, he indicated that Astana remains open to hosting peace negotiations. In summary, he stated firmly that Kazakhstan supports the initiation of direct top-level talks between Ukraine and Russia, but underscores the necessity of preliminary work to foster mutual understanding. While not a mediator, Kazakhstan is ready, if required, to offer its good offices as a venue for negotiations and meetings at any level. Meanwhile, analysts continue to dissect former President Trump's sharp statements regarding Ukraine, Russia, the return of territories, and what he called a paper tiger struggling economically. Western media notes that Trump's abrupt rhetorical shift is surprising, given that he previously pushed Ukraine toward making territorial concessions and just a month ago figuratively rolled out the red carpet for Putin in Alaska. In Europe, some believe Trump is signaling his intent to withdraw from the issue, a message for both the European Union and Kyiv, according to Reuters sources. It seems like a farewell, but things could change tomorrow. In any case, the cards are on the table. We know what we must do, said a Western European official. A senior Eastern European diplomat commented that Trump's remarks are meant to indicate he is stepping back, signaling that this matter should now be handled by Europe. The much-maligned CNN recalled Trump's previous remarks about President Zelensky and his overtures to Putin, as well as his statements on the return of territories and other matters. For Kyiv, these are welcome words. Yet, that is where the optimism ends. The United States is said to want the war to continue, aiming for what is nearly impossible, as reported by the article's authors. Trump no longer wants the war to end now. He believes it should continue until Ukraine regains what it almost certainly cannot recover. Privately, Kyiv would like the war to end tomorrow with a just and lasting peace, given the acute shortage of personnel and the slow territorial losses endured for months. Ukrainians, however, find little hope in Trump's warm words, according to the Financial Times, which pointed out that the American president's statement that Russia might reclaim Crimea and Donbass is not backed by economic or military support. A war is being waged against Russia, and the most intense phase is now underway, as Kremlin officials declared the previous day. Peskov stated that the special military operation is one thing, but the war surrounding Russians is another, and that the acute phase is in full swing. Russia, he said, intends to win this war for the sake of its future. Addressing Trump's comments about Russia not being a paper tiger, officials replied that Russia is not a tiger at all, but rather associated with a bear. There are no paper bears. They only have real ones. Putin has often described Russia as a bear in various tones. There is nothing paper about it. Notably in Moscow, responses to such remarks are measured, while in St. Petersburg, they are more severe. There it was decided not to restore Trump's honorary title of Esau. Local Cossacks issued an order to symbolically flog Trump. After his recent statements, they decided this would be proper. Although it cannot be done physically, the directive remains. Addressing the General Assembly at the United Nations, Zelensky called for stopping Putin and Russia, arguing that this would be less costly for the world than building bunkers and waging war later. He also rated his meeting with Trump positively, saying, "Yesterday, we had a good meeting with President Trump. I also spoke with many other strong leaders, and together we can achieve a great deal." He reaffirmed Ukraine's efforts to secure genuine support from Europe and continued reliance on the United States. Medvedev, in his typical style, remarked that Trump could still change his stance and force Zelensky to surrender. But, he said, Trump is not that type of person and will surely return, as he always does. Perhaps in a few days, Trump will urge the Green pianist to sign a capitulation, or suggest a trip to Mars with Musk, or propose some new grand idea to claim a Nobel Prize. Despite these predictions, United States Vice President Vance stated several hours ago that Russia will face severe consequences if it refuses to negotiate in good faith, and United States officials have declared that Putin must halt the killings. Secretary of State Marco Rubio communicated this personally to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The secretary confirmed President Trump's call to end the violence and emphasized the need for Moscow to take meaningful steps toward a lasting settlement of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. The Russian Foreign Ministry offered a different account, noting only an exchange of views regarding the war. Russia, they say, is prepared to honor agreements reached in Alaska. Lavrov stated that Moscow rejects Western and European actions, which he claims prolong the conflict. The two sides reviewed the entire bilateral agenda, including prospects for restoring socio-political contacts, and reaffirmed the importance of the momentum set by the presidents of Russia and the United States to normalize their nations' relations. Thus, meetings and talks are ongoing, and threats are exchanged from all directions. Mutual threats. Will peace come, and is it near? Do you agree with those politicians who say this war cannot be won on the battlefield? Friends, please share your comments below this video, leave a like, and subscribe to the Vremya Prayatko channel on YouTube. Also, note that we do not publish on any other platforms. Our videos are being stolen and reposted on vKontakte with unrelated advertisements and information that does not reflect our views. The platform's administrators ignore our requests to block those stealing content. Just remember, I am only here on YouTube. Now let us continue. A significant loss for Ukraine. Russia launched a combined strike on the territory of one of the Ukrainian ground forces training units. This is not the first such incident since the war began. The Ukrainian army officially confirmed casualties among its personnel, specifying that missiles struck a shelter. Previously, it had been reported that many training centers have been equipped with underground infrastructure, precisely because of such targeted Russian strikes. Among the weapons used were 2 Iskander ballistic missiles. As a result, despite safety measures, the strike caused unavoidable losses among the troops. Ukrainian military channels acknowledged that a Russian surveillance drone was seen in the sky before the strike, but it was not brought down. This incident took place in the Chernihiv region. Meanwhile, Ukraine carried out strikes and, according to Bloomberg, halted operations at 2 Russian oil ports on the Black Sea. The shutdowns affected the Caspian Pipeline Consortium terminal and the Sheskari's oil depot, both near Novorossiysk. Additionally, sea drones targeted the port of Tuapse. Trump received another rebuttal following his recent harsh remarks directed at world leaders. This time, the mayor of London responded to the American president's comments at the General Assembly. Trump had called him a terrible mayor and accused the British capital of heading towards Sharia law and suffering from failed migration policies. In turn, the mayor suggested Trump had gone too far due to what he called sexism and Islamophobia. He also implied that Americans are flocking to London because life in the United States is not as good. The conflict between the two politicians has lasted for several years. Previously, Trump labeled the London mayor a disaster and a complete failure. The mayor retorted, "I believe President Trump has shown himself to be racist, sexist, misogynistic, and Islamophobic. He even called you a horrible mayor. Listen, I am simply grateful that we have a record number of Americans coming to London since records began. There has never been a time when more Americans have visited London. There must be a reason for this. If you look at various criteria, we often rank first globally in culture, direct foreign investment, sports, and opportunities for people to fulfill their potential. I am very proud. We are the greatest city in the world as long as this continues." Friends, what would you say to Trump if given the chance? I know many of you have mixed feelings about him, though there were hopes for change after Biden left the White House. Please share your perspective in the comments. In Uzbekistan, the story continues to circulate about women whose sons, having traveled to Russia for work, ended up first in Russian prisons and then on the front lines in Ukraine. According to various reports, Russia holds thousands of Uzbek citizens in its prisons, mostly men aged 18 to 35. Many of them call home in tears, telling their families they may be forced into the war in Ukraine. Relatives interviewed by Kun Uz say that force is used to coerce these potential soldiers into signing contracts. The report mentions systematic arrest of Uzbek migrants under various pretexts, such as illegal storage or transport of banned substances. Parents do not believe their sons are criminals and demand their return. According to the I Want to Live project, Uzbekistan currently ranks first in the number of foreign prisoners of war in Ukraine. A prison sentence for a social media like, in Uzbekistan, a man was sent to a penal colony for liking a video on Odnoklasniki 6 years ago. The defendant, Ulugbek Alimardanov, had marked as liked a song titled In Love with Paradise, which authorities later deemed extremist. The court found that by doing so, he had distributed prohibited content among his friends, thereby breaking the law. His sentence: 3 years of imprisonment in a general regime colony. The authorities labeled this like a serious crime. Since Alimardanov's offense was classified as grave, he received a custodial sentence. However, Considering mitigating circumstances, Article 57 of the Criminal Code was applied, and his punishment was set below the statutory maximum.